Okay, good evening, everyone. And today we have the episode two of the marriage party. And the intent of having this podcast is there are two intentions. The first one is to inspire the young couples who are already married, newly wedded couples. And the second is to also guide the couples who are aspiring to get into this bond called marriage. So, and therefore, today on our podcast, we have our guest, Susanna, who is an evangelizer. She is a matchmaker and also a proud mother of two. And the third one is on the way in a week's time. So Susanna is going to hit a hat trick and going to be a happy mother of three. And therefore, we found that Susanna is, the best person who can guide the couples. She has been guiding the couples for, quite some time. And we are happy to have you here, Susanna, and looking forward to a very fruitful discussion that will help the young couples.
Thanks so much, Elvis. Thanks for inviting me to be on this show.
Yes. So I forgot to mention that Susanna is also the author of a book that she has newly launched. And the name of the book is Let God Surprise You. That's right, Susanna?
That's it, yes.
So could you please tell us something about your book? Like, what is it all about?
So I wrote a book called Let God Surprise You because that's the tagline of my matchmaking service as well.
Okay.
And the main reason, I guess, that I wrote it is because one, I like reading and I like writing. And I thought about what kind of book would I like to read,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, I would love to read a love story which is based on first of all another Indian. We don't hear a lot about Indian Catholics writing books, for
Okay.
example. And to hear about how God works in people's lives. We love to hear testimonies, and in a way the book is literally just a testimony. It's about God working in my life, in my husband's life, how he worked before we even met and how he worked
Mm-hmm.
through our courtship and engagement and finally how we got married. So
Okay.
it's a love story, but it's also something that I thought could help other young people who are on their own journeys, give them
Mhm.
some hope and to maybe give them some ideas and guidelines about how to stay close to the Lord in the midst of all this, how to discern, but without actually telling them how to do it, just sharing through my own story and example.
Okay, great, wonderful, fantastic. So I guess all the viewers who will be viewing it, later on YouTube, I would encourage you to grab a copy of this book because it's going to be very insightful and helpful as well. Susanna, we would like to know, like, how has your faith shaped your marriage? Like, what role, according to you, does gospel value play in the life of a married couple?
So for me, from a pretty young age, I have been into my faith, and so
Mhm.
I've heard about Catholic marriage. What is it supposed to be? What is God's plan for marriage? And I always had that desire to have that kind of marriage. And then meeting other Catholic couples along the way, I saw
Mhm.
something really beautiful and something good. And so that's what I always had. I had the desire. And my husband, Joel, long before he met me, also had that same desire. He said,
Mhm.
I want to find a woman whose heart is given to the Lord.
Mhm.
And when we met, the interesting thing is he was interested in me not because he thought I was very pretty. I don't think he even thought I was pretty,
Okay.
but he knew I was a missionary. And he's a doctor.
Wow.
And typically, doctors marry doctors, but he was different because he said he originally thought, okay, I'll marry a doctor. But then little by little, he felt God was leading him to just search for someone who really put God first.
Mhm.
And so both of us had that desire, not just to find someone nice, but someone who really was given to the Lord, surrendered to the Lord. And so, right from the beginning, for our marriage, faith has played the most important role because
Mhm.
neither of us wanted to get married unless we found someone for whom their faith was a priority. And
Mhm.
then, in the practical aspect of it, it really just meant that um, our desire is to love each other as God wants us to love each other, to have the kind of marriage that God wants us to have. And I would say in a very, again, a practical way, it means seeking Him at every point in our
Mm-hmm.
married life. So right from, when we were discerning, should we marry each other, to, the decisions about the wedding, and then when we actually got married, being open to life,
Mm-hmm.
having babies, and, each decision, we
Right.
had to make, as a married couple, you have to make so many decisions. But I think that because of our faith, and the idea that God guides us, that God wants to play a very active role in our marriage. He's not just there for Sundays. And so that's
Mm-hmm.
what we try, not always perfectly, but we both know that that's true. And therefore, we try to stay in tune with God so that He can guide us about how to live our lives, how to um, be married, and how to make decisions as a couple and as a family.
Okay, great, fantastic. So, Susan, according to you, like, what would you suggest the couples, like, the picture about marriage that they have before getting married and after getting married? What gaps do you see, and what would what would you like to advise them?
Well, I think you can't ever fully know, right? No matter how much you read marriage advice and you listen to people, like you can't know until you're actually living it. But to some extent, there is some preparation that you can do. And I think that one of the things that I tell young people is, first of all, don't rush into marriage. I think that a lot of people, especially in India, we tend to be sort of like, okay, you have to get married, you meet someone, you make a decision, and you just jump in.
Mm-hmm.
Please don't do that. Take your time, get to know somebody well, and prioritize your faith in the midst of all this. So try to see if the other person also has faith at the center. Try to see what is their character really made of. Don't rely on your parents to tell you, haha, he's a God-fearing boy, she's a God-fearing girl. Like, you have to know each other well, and then start on this journey, because you're going to need God
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
on the way. It's
Okay.
marriage is challenging. I think everyone's heard that, but they don't know it. Like, they don't really believe it. They think it's going to be smooth and easy. But there are a lot of challenges, and I think that you can navigate them better if you all both have the same foundation, that foundation of faith, the foundation
Mm-hmm.
of the same values, the same priorities, goals. So I actually wrote a book before I wrote this one. My first book was actually a handbook for Catholic couples who are discerning marriage, and it just has sets of questions and things that you can discuss before getting married.
Okay.
So it's actually, that's one of the things that I really advise people is, you sit and you talk about everything before you even decide to get married. You should know, where is this other person? Like, do we have the same heart? Do we have the same desire and goals for our life? And even then, you'll still have challenges, but you have those big things in place. So I would say, yeah, like, take your time before getting married. Really get to know someone. Set aside that, oh, I'm this old already. I'm already 28, 29, 30. Don't worry about that. What's more important is to have a happy marriage and a strong relationship.
Okay. Great. Great. Fantastic. So, Susan, according to you, like you are an evangelist. Yeah, you live the gospel value. So what would you recommend the couples? Like, how can they be evangelists, even being in this, in a union of marriage?
I guess people have a misunderstanding that being an evangelist means someone who is sort of, up on a stage, like making, giving talks. I mean, that's nice and all. And it's nice when we have the opportunity to do that. But most of evangelizing is really bringing Jesus to people, right? In some way, helping them to meet Him in a personal way, to see Him alive and active in the world today, and, helping them to trust Him as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like married couples have a very beautiful opportunity to do that. First of all, just by our witness, just by living a happy, united married life, one that is open to life, one that is fruitful. When people see that, say, okay, like, something's different, right? This is not so
Right.
common. We don't see it that often. And for them to see, you can put God first, you can make countercultural decisions, and you can have so much of peace when you put God at the center. And for my husband and me, we made a lot of unusual choices,
Mm-hmm.
which, a lot of people would say, like, what are you all doing? Why are you doing it? For example, having three children in the space of 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
We're not even reached our fifth wedding anniversary. um, I'm a stay-at-home mom,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of different things, that we've chosen. But if people know us and see us, they can also see that we're happy, and that we really
Right.
have a true unity and peace between us. And we can only say that that's because we believe God has led us through these
Mm-hmm.
decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think one of the biggest things is witness. And then the other thing is also one of the ways we can evangelize is by inviting people into our married life, to into our home, into relationships with us. Both my husband and I love to talk to young people. Sometimes they'll come over and chat with us, and we try to, be welcoming and share our lives with them. And if we can share some advice or just listen to their struggles. So rather than being very isolated or very like we have no time for anyone, like we try to have time to the extent that we can with like
Mm-hmm.
our children's needs, of course, but to be a place of welcome for others. And I think that can be a very beautiful way to evangelize.
So, Susan, just out of the box, like what's the? I didn't ask you what's the name of your two kids. So,
So
how
my
old are they?
my oldest daughter is she just turned 4 years old. Her name is Elizabeth Rose,
Okay,
and
wow.
son is John Paul, named after Saint John Paul.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah,
One
yeah,
of my favorite saints, Saint John
yeah.
Paul II.
Us too.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, Susanna, how important, according to you, is prayer life in a relationship of marriage? And practically speaking, like how could couples, come together and pray, dedicate that time every day, considering the challenges and the hustle of life? At times it's very difficult, practically speaking, to make that time sit and pray. Though
Yeah,
we may understand the importance of prayer. So how do
yeah.
you think that balance, the couple can strike that balance?
Yeah. So I know, after all these years, I know how absolutely essential it is. And yet I also know how challenging it is.
Mm-hmm.
Especially, so I'll just say, so first of all, from my perspective, with the small baby stage, it's absolutely challenging. And this is me, I didn't have a job outside the home, and
Mm-hmm.
yet it was a lot. Like there was hardly any few moments where I could even, sit down. So what a lot of other mothers would advise me is like, okay, when you're absolutely in survival state, you
Mm-hmm.
just pray as you're looking after your children. It doesn't have to look
Right.
like when you are a single person, you could go and sit in the adoration chapel for 1 hour, have, this uninterrupted journaling time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All of that is wonderful, but maybe it's not possible at that stage.
Right.
But when it is possible, when you have that time, you choose prayer over other things. It's okay if your house is messy, if you've had half an hour to sit down with the Lord. It's okay if, you eat sandwiches for dinner sometimes instead of, making a big homemade meal. And
Okay.
but you have to both be willing to maybe
Right.
sacrifice other things in order to put your prayer life first. And the reason is I've seen it very clearly with both my husband and me. On the days when we do both prioritize our prayer time, our
Mm-hmm.
relationship really works better, our life works better. On the days when we have both ignored our prayer time or we felt that everything else is more important, we can see the effects of that. So I would
Right.
really highly recommend. It doesn't have to be 1 hour long, it doesn't have to look like it looked before, but it should be there. There should be some time every day where you just set aside that time. One is for your own personal prayer time, and the other is together as a couple, even if it's a few minutes. That's
Mm-hmm.
one thing again that Joel and I we tried right from the beginning, right from our courtship days. We would end our day, if we're talking, we were long distance, so we would be talking, video calling, and we would end our call just praying, and even now we'd like to do more than that. It's wonderful. I love the couples who sit and have rosaries together and full praise and worship and whatnot. That's wonderful. But even
Mm-hmm.
if you can't do all of that, to have even a few minutes every day where you just bring everything from the day to the Lord together, bring each other's problems and struggles. Then I know, he knows, Joel knows what I've been going through. I know what he's been going through. So we can pray for each other's struggles as well. And it's a beautiful way to both be united and also just receive that grace from the Lord. So I would say, please, couples, whatever else has to go, it's okay, but prioritize that prayer time.
Great, great, fantastic. On a similar line, Susanna, how important, before marriage, everything is taken for, granted that it's okay if this is not there, that is not there. even I, like for example, before marriage, it was okay, finances and all. I would literally follow why money is not important, and getting very inspired by the sermon. Don't run after money. But practically speaking, after marriage, how how should a couple what how much importance they should give to uh, finances, their financial condition, at the same time not compromising on the gospel values. So, how important do you think is this financial aspect in marriage?
Yeah, so that's something Joel and I definitely have grown in because,
Mhm.
and we're still growing in because I have been a missionary, so literally for me, like finances are just like, okay, Lord, you provide, no savings, nothing. And Joel's come from a little more responsible
Mhm.
background, and yet he also only started working shortly before we got married. And so for both of us, it's been something that we've grown in, but we're also, I think it's a process of discernment, right? Because
Mhm.
we have want to be in the world but not of the world. So sitting and trying to save every last penny is not necessarily of the Lord. I don't think that, because in that case, why would you have another child? Why would you even have one child? You say it's financially, it's not responsible. But you have to weigh it out and say, okay, what is God promising and what is my responsibility? So
Mhm.
there's definitely a place for responsibility. You don't just waste all your money and say, okay, God will provide. But at the same time, we have to keep room for God's provision as well and God's guidance. And so, what we practically try to do is we try to set aside, I think someone gave us this advice, like a percentage of the income. So, we sort of say, okay, this much is for investing, this much is for, our regular expenses. And, what we can
Mhm.
try not to waste too much money on like regular expenses, and then this much is for giving away, that we should also be giving to not only to the church, but also to the poor. And I think that our hearts should always remember that our treasure has to be in heaven.
Right.
I think it's actually easier for most people to think of it only in terms of, being so careful or so scared or so worried that we don't want to do anything for the Lord. So, of course, there's a balance, but we have to find that healthy balance. And maybe each of us individually might tend to one or the other. Like some of us are so irresponsible that we need to learn how
Correct.
to
Correct.
get down to it and like actually sit and figure out our finances and our budgeting. And some of us might be so careful that we don't even want to give like, 100 rupees away because you're like, oh, that should be
Right.
used for my
Right.
children's future education. So, yeah, I think we have to discern and ask the Lord to help us
Right.
to have that healthy balance.
So yes, actually on that note, I would like to share like a testimony kind of which I just experienced yesterday. So at times, I do believe in this tithe, okay, giving the 10%. But at times the monthly thing now is so tight that you feel like, oh, this month let's skip it.
Yeah.
But and it's a test, I guess. It's like a test of Abraham. Okay, let's see whether I do it. And I guess there is a promise also in the Bible, in Proverbs of somewhere, that you test me for this. Just give that 10% tithe and see I open the windows of heaven. And this is my experience just last yesterday. The church required some amount and I gave it. And immediately, as soon as I transferred that amount, I got a call for 1,000. I'm a trainer. I got a call for training 1,000 students across
Amazing.
7 colleges.
Praise God.
So it's, I witnessed this scripture passage coming live to me.
That's beautiful. I've heard someone say you can't outdo God in generosity.
Right,
We think we're being generous, and God is like, I am able to do far more than you can
right.
do.
Great, great, Susanna. It's wonderful. I guess a lot of learnings coming out from this, a lot of insights for the young couples. So, Susanna, what advice would you give to young Catholics who are preparing for marriage, like who are aspiring and about to get married?
So like I said, the first thing is,
Mhm.
just getting to know each other well before, actually getting married. But
Mhm.
supposing you've already made that decision, you're already on your way to marriage. This sounds very cliched, but I would say, like, please invest in your communication,
Mhm.
because in India we're not really used to, communicating. We're used to that very indirect form of communication. I'll tell someone else, they'll tell you, or I won't talk to you until you understand what I'm feeling.
Right, right.
And it's because maybe we've not seen that in our own homes, right? Healthy communication.
Mm-hmm,
And so it's a learning process, but I would say, like, please start doing it immediately.
mm-hmm,
Just share what you're thinking, share what you're feeling, be very open. Don't I feel like what a lot of women tend to do is they feel things but they don't say it, and then those things add up over the years. There's a lot of resentment, a lot of pain that they've never expressed. And
mm-hmm,
so I'd say, don't be afraid to share, what you need, what you are feeling, what you are thinking. And for men also, both ways. It should be both ways, of course, but to
mm-hmm,
be open to each other, to really hear, like, I'm struggling with this, this is I feel like this is too much for me. I didn't really like the way that you said that to me, that hurt my feelings. Just
mm-hmm,
say it. And for us to really be open and respond to when our spouse says something or our fiance says something, to respond with openness and say, okay, like, we feel attacked, and yet to put that aside and say, okay, thank you for sharing that with me. I'll try to, let's work this out, or I'll try to do it differently. And I really want to shout out to my husband, because he is a very unusual guy in that way, is that
okay,
he
okay.
is wonderful at resolving conflicts and at speaking up. Like, I will keep it in for some time, but he'll immediately say, let's just talk about it. And even if it's a little difficult and painful, like, we're just so happy by the end that we did talk about things. And finally, that we want the other one to feel heard, we want the other one to feel understood, we want the other one to feel at peace. So I would tell young couples, please, just say what's on your mind, say what's on your heart, and feel comfortable with this person. Of all the people, this is the person you should feel
Mm-hmm.
comfortable to say anything to.
Great, great, fantastic. Uh, Susanna, like we see, like nowadays, there's a lot of increase in divorces post marriage, and the reasons are also very silly. The small reasons leads to such great conclusions. And from my experience, what I have noticed is there is a lot of interference of the in-laws on both the sides,
Mm.
and this there are things that unforeseen things happen which were not predicted before the marriage.
Yeah.
So in that case, what would you advise the couple?
Yeah. So Joel and I used to give a talk at the marriage preparation course here in Vasai.
Mm-hmm,
And one of the things, so the talk was about decision making in marriage.
mm-hmm,
And one of the big topics that we would talk about is, he would ask the couples, whose opinion is most important when it comes to making decisions.
mm-hmm,
He would ask them, and they would all look at him. Then he'd say, "Mama and Dada," right? And some of them would be like, not really sure. And he's like, "No, it's the person sitting next to you right now." And this is something that maybe people don't realize, is
mm-hmm,
that when you get married, your spouse's feelings, opinions, and thoughts are much more important than your mama and dada's. And we've grown up perhaps in this culture where it's almost as if uh, you have to keep your parents happy no matter what.
mm-hmm,
And now, of course, there is a place we have to respect our parents. We're not saying that anyone should be disrespectful or rude, or that they should just cut off their, relationship with their parents. But there has to be a real shift, a real change, where we really care about our own spouse's opinions more than our mothers, more than our fathers, more than all the aunties and uncles and relatives, because everyone has an opinion. This is
right.
what it is. This is the reality of our life in India. But we have to choose to prioritize our spouse. And if you do not do that, you will suffer. Your marriage will suffer. I can promise you that. I've seen it enough times. Either your whole marriage will break, or your marriage
Mm-hmm,
will look like it's together, but you all will not be of one heart and of one mind. So I would definitely say that you need to set good boundaries right from the beginning, where it's a dying, it's like you have to die old relationship with your parents. And it's a little painful, especially if your whole life you've been, you that's the way you've treated them. But it means taking a step back and saying, Mama, Dada, thank you for all you've done for me, but now this is a new stage of life. I'm sure you don't want me to remain a child forever. I am now grown up and I need to discuss this with my wife or with my husband. And thank you for your advice, but we'll discuss it and we'll decide. Now, I know this sounds great in theory, but they actually have to do it, and it's difficult. But it
Yes.
has to be done. It must be done, otherwise you will not have a strong marriage.
So what you're saying, if I would have to summarize, is like you're saying the both the partners, the wife as well as the husband, needs to have their own backbone, right?
Yes, absolutely. You have to. You have to. You cannot stay like this forever. You can't keep everybody happy. You can't have everybody's opinions sort of being the deciding factor. At some point, you have to be okay with people being unhappy with your decisions. That's just what it is, you know. And
Absolutely.
you have to choose the- to make sure that it is your spouse. And of course, I'm not talking about black, like morally wrong decision. Just
Mm-hmm.
because your spouse wants you to do something wrong doesn't mean you should do something wrong. But I'm talking about things where it's pertaining to your own marriage, your own family, your living situation, your children,
Mm-hmm.
discipline, education. Now, those are for you and your spouse to make together. Everyone else can have an opinion, but it's not actually everyone else's opinion. And
Right.
so I highly recommend that you start practicing speaking up. Just saying, thanks for, and without shouting. That's the more difficult thing, right? Sometimes we get angry, but without getting angry, just being calm, communicating, saying, thank you for sharing your thoughts, but this is what we're going to do. And for the parents or in-laws, it's going to be a shock at first. How can my child not listen to my opinion? But they will get used to it. At the beginning, any boundaries can be a little bit painful, but everyone gets used to it after a while. And I've seen that happen. I've seen people grow in this area.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to start. We have to be willing to do something a little bit difficult, which will benefit us in the long term.
So I guess what you have just now said is like the application of what Jesus has mentioned in the scripture, right? That once a person is married, he shall leave his father and mother and get united to his wife. So
Absolutely. There
it
has to be
it
that.
actually means that you don't actually leave them, but you prioritize your wife, your
Yeah.
spouse over your parents.
Yes, and sometimes it might mean actually leaving from the point of view of, I do recommend that people discern whether they should, sometimes they do need to leave the joint family in
Hmm.
order to have a healthier marriage. And
Okay.
I know of many situations like that. There might be times where you cannot, you might need to care for an elderly parent, and that's part of God's responsibilities for
Mhm.
you. And yet, even in those situations, you have to have boundaries within the joint family. That
Mhm.
means, for example, mother-in-law will not have to tell the daughter-in-law what time she should wake up, or you know, or if they say, okay, don't give chocolates to the child, and they say, no, I'm going to do it anyway. Whatever it is, it's not
Mhm.
that being an elder makes them like they can just do anything, and vice versa. We also have to give freedom to our in-laws and our parents. Like, they are also their own human beings. They can also make their own choices. So boundaries is about saying, what am I responsible for? What are you responsible for? I am responsible for my marriage and my children. you know I am responsible for keeping the peace, for not starting fights and problems, and for sharing. All of us should be sharing the responsibilities as well.
Right.
So, just from a personal perspective, my husband and I decided not to stay in the joint family when we got married, and it was
Hmm.
quite difficult for my in-laws to accept. But they did accept it, eventually. And we had a very good relationship with them. And now, about 1 year back, we've moved back into the joint family because my father-in-law is very sick, and my mother-in-law needs to be supported.
Hmm.
And I can tell you that we actually have a very good relationship. We are working well together, but it's because we all have good boundaries. And my
Great.
mother-in-law, I really appreciate her because she has really adjusted so beautifully. I'm sure there are many things that we do that she does not agree with, but she doesn't
Hmm.
say it.
Hmm.
And we also have to adjust to not having all that perfect privacy that we would love, or doing things exactly our own way. We try to adjust to each other,
Hmm.
but we do have separate areas of, okay, this is, you don't have to agree with everything, but we do have to accept each other as we are.
So at times a decent distance would be very healthy, right?
Yes, I definitely think so. I've heard from multiple people that they got into very toxic joint family situations, very toxic. And after they moved out, they found things got much better. So it's not that moving out of the joint family is like the worst thing in the world. People act as if it's some scandal. It's not a scandal.
Right.
Sometimes it's a healthier thing to do, and sometimes you have healthier relationships when you're not all living under the same roof.
So maybe even
So
staying closer and,
yes,
then for the
yes,
boy to manage his parents as well as the wife, so he can, balance both the
yes,
things.
absolutely. I think that's a very wonderful option whenever it's possible, and I think people should think of it before marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way that we can live close by but not under the same roof?
Okay.
So we can be in each other's lives. We're there to support each other, but we're not like in each other's space all the time. So
Right. Right.
it's wonderful when you have that option, and I think it's something people can pray and discern and see if God gives them ways to make that happen.
So Susan, coming towards the end, maybe the last question, the second last question, like what role does forgiveness play in a married life?
I think that for everyone, forgiveness
Uh-huh.
is absolutely essential because we are going to hurt each other. We are going to fail each other. No matter what our best intentions, we ourselves are imperfect, and our spouse is also imperfect. So I think realizing that first of all is that
Mhm.
we are imperfect and we are going to hurt each other. So go into it with that heart of, I'm not here to hold, to count all the mistakes you've made, to, say, you did this, you did this, you did that, because then, that's going to add up and hurt a marriage. Um, so I think we have to go in with that willingness to say, okay, I'm willing to let things go. I'm willing to forgive you, but there has to be reconciliation. There has to be acknowledgement of wounds. So forgiveness doesn't mean that you just ignore the issue. You have to say, hey,
Mhm.
you hurt me, when you did that. And
Mhm.
when the other person says sorry, you have to be quick to apologize, quick to forgive, like the heart of Jesus, to have that compassionate and merciful heart. And I think when you love each other, when there's enough good stuff, then it's easier to forgive.
Right.
Um, so yeah, I think it's definitely essential. And also to remember that God has forgiven us, that we ourselves have hurt not only our own spouse, but we have
Mhm.
hurt many people. We have hurt
Right.
God, and God has forgiven us. And if God can forgive us, can't we also forgive each other?
Right. Yeah, I've seen many, like I know some couples in my circle, like the marriage is now almost on the verge of breaking just because of unforgiveness. There's one partner who has done something wrong, and the extended family wants to punish the partner, but the couple is not taking that stand of unforgiveness,
Mm.
and the marriage is on the verge of break.
Yeah, that's something that they have to make that choice, right? You say, do you want to be, do you want to have a happy marriage, or do you want to hold on to unforgiveness? You can't have both.
Right.
And there's a lot of freedom, when we're able to truly forgive.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we ourselves have a lot of freedom. And when we don't forgive, it's sort of keeping that, first of all, it's keeping a room for the devil, like we'll
Right.
see a lot of, you will not see closeness to God as long as you hold unforgiveness in your heart. That's
Right.
one of the sins that we tend to, will other sins we'll confess happily, but unforgiveness, you're like, okay, I'll forgive, I'll be a good person, God, but I will never speak to that person. I will never forgive that person. And I think as long as we keep that, we have closed the door to our hearts, to God. God does not have place to be in our lives as long as we hold on. So
Mhm.
it's
Mhm.
a choice. It's a choice that we have to make. God is offering us a path to freedom, true freedom, um, and we have to choose whether we want to take it or not.
Right. So the last question, Susanna, is what role does community play? Uh, as a church, we are a community, and what role does community play? Getting involved in the community, how can it, nourish and help sustain this union of marriage?
It might look different at different stages of life. I don't think it's good to be completely isolated
Mhm.
from other families, other believers, others who are into their faith. At the same time, in many communities that we see around, um, And I found it very beautiful because
Mm-hmm.
what they would do is they would tell the families, so we were families and singles all together,
Right.
and they would tell the families, hey, like, you are one of us. We want you to be part of as much as you can, but the needs of your kids come first. So if you can't manage, to make it for morning prayer, you don't even have to explain it to us. Like, that's totally, what's needed. So,
Mm-hmm.
and at the same time, we really were able to be blessed by being together with other couples. And so I would say that community is important, but it needs to be flexible enough for families to be able to participate to the extent that they can. It should not be at the expense of your children's needs that you are part of any kind of community.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think it can be very beautiful because, especially for, I think men and women separately like to have like small groups, or groups of other mothers or women who they. That's something that I've always like found good. Is when you have these little groups where you can share your life, you can get advice, you can
Mm-hmm.
pray for each other, and for men as well.
Right.
A husband and wife can't be everything for each other, and so we do need brothers and sisters. And I think that it's if you are able to have, like, especially a small group for both husbands and wives separately, I think that's beautiful. Nothing like it. I think that's something I would love to see more of in the Catholic Church.
Great. So it serves as a cushion, right? Like as a stress buster
Yeah, yeah, it can be very
to
helpful
share
and
your
very,
challenges and also get some advice from the community.
absolutely. I think it can really be a blessing.
Great, great, fantastic. So it was wonderful speaking to you, Susanna, and I hope our viewers will find it really useful. Uh, to end with, please grab a copy of Susanna, and if you need any help, I will put in the details if you want to connect with Susanna. Susanna is a matchmaker, as I have already introduced her. So anyone needs any help, you can reach out to her. The details will be there in the description of this video. So once again, a very big thanks to you, Susanna. And to the viewers, kindly look forward to this podcast with many more insights that will help you nourish your married life.
Thank
Thank
you so much, Elvis. Thanks for
thank you.
having me
Thank
on
you.
your show.
Yes.